Welcome in on a Wednesday, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. So after Iranian missile strikes in Israel, talk today of a coordinated response against Iran, new fears of a wider war. Plus, nominees and moving the needle in the presidential race. Tim Walz and J.D. Vance move from the stage to the states that could decide the presidential election. We are live. This is CBS News 24/7. Let's go. We're going to get to all of that in just a moment. But first, the Biden administration reaction to a national tragedy. So earlier today, the president ordered 1,000 soldiers to help the North Carolina National Guard in getting out critical food and supplies and water to the hardest hit areas after Helene. And just moments ago, our video monitors caught this: President Joe Biden departing from Joint Base Andrews on his way to the Carolinas to survey that deadly destruction. It was left behind by Hurricane Helene, which is now a record maker. He touched on a range of topics before getting on to Air Force One. Let's take a listen.
Look, we're going down to see what the damage done. I'm going to be going back again to other states. But here's the thing. This natural disaster is incredibly consequential. The last thing we need on top of that is a man-made disaster, what's going on at the ports. We're getting pushback already, and we're hearing from the folks regionally that they're having trouble getting product they need because of the port strike. And look, there's a consortium of basically 6 owners that control all the ports from all the way to the East Coast down around the Gulf. And they've made incredible profits, over 800% profit since the pandemic. And the owners are making tens of millions of dollars from this. The last thing they need is to profit off of this. It's time for them to sit at the table and get this strike done.
Will you be communicating with them directly about any of this?
We have. I haven't personally, but we have.
Can you tell us anything about Iran and Israel's possible
retaliation? I called a meeting of the G7 today. We're working on a joint statement all of us agree on, from Japan to France to Germany to et cetera. And what we're doing in that regard is we're making it clear that there are things that have to be done. And it's obviously Iran has gone way it's way off course. We're going to put together a joint statement. Hasn't been done yet. It'll be done before too long, probably by the time we land. And there's going to be some sanctions imposed on Iran.
Sir, do you have a view on the workers' fight for restrictions on technology or automation for the golf workers?
No, look, they just sit down and talk. Because remember, we negotiated a similar strike on the West Coast before, and they worked it out. It's time. They won't even talk, so let's get that done.
Sir, sir, can I ask you, what is your support an attack on Iran's nuclear sites by Israel?
The answer is no. I think there's things. We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond, but they should respond in proportion.
Little bit of a slice of what it's like to be the president of the United States. You're headed to the Carolinas to talk about the damage left by that hurricane, while at the same time, international issues and reporters right there at every step asking a wide range of questions, really taking advantage of that moment with the president. But let's get back to why the president is about to get on that plane. This is a look at where the president is headed, and look at the damage. This is what he will see as he flies over that area. Rivers in South Carolina at one point peaked at 16 feet deep. Let's add some context to that. Before Helene, a lot of those rivers in many places were just about 12 inches deep. So that equals devastation and death. Helene has now become the 2nd deadliest storm to hit the U.S., second only, in fact, to Hurricane Katrina. And at this hour, we can give you some solid numbers from emergency crews on the ground. In the wake of all of this flooding, at least 175 people have lost their lives. Hundreds at this hour remain missing. So while the president addresses the situation in the Carolinas, Vice President Kamala Harris is set to visit the state of Georgia. Power outages and downed trees plaguing that state. In fact, we understand some areas say they still can't access drinkable water in the pipes below ground as well, while water pours down on them from Mother Nature. CBS News campaign reporter Nydia Cavazos joins me now from Augusta with more on the vice president's movements. We see some of the trees down there and the effort to get cleanup behind you. Voters in Georgia are going to be affected in deep ways. What are we expecting from Harris during her visit?
Well, the vice president will be arriving in Augusta, Georgia shortly this afternoon in a couple of hours. We know that Harris is going to be surveying the area, the damages in communities, and then she will be delivering remarks to give information on what the federal response is in aiding these communities, what actions are being taken, what resources have already been deployed into this area. This is going to happen before she heads back to Washington, D.C. Now, initially, Harris was scheduled to be on the campaign trail today in Pennsylvania with the running mate Governor Walz after the vice presidential debate, but these plans had to be canceled given the nature of this catastrophe that people in Georgia and the southern states in the U.S. are living at the very moment.
Yeah, Nydia, if I'm a voter in one of these states, the Carolinas or Georgia hit hard by this, I want to know how the person who will get my vote, or if I'm thinking about giving my vote, is going to respond to this tragedy. Nydia Cavazos, thank you so much for that. So in the race for the White House, today is going to be all about getting into the battleground states for the VP nominees. We're talking about Tim Walz being in the state of Pennsylvania. J.D. Vance is on his way to Michigan today. In fact, in about 30 minutes, and you can hear the live video there, he's expected to deliver remarks at an event in Auburn Hills. Joining us now live is CBS News campaign reporter Torian Small. Torian, does the Vance camp, so to speak, see this as a victory lap, and how will he really capitalize on what was said in the debate stage last night?
Well, Reed, I'm expecting to hear Vance to continue what he's been doing before this debate, and that's to put the pressure on Kamala Harris. You know, what was interesting about last night's debate, and we saw from that, is that Vance wanted to make sure that the conversation stayed focused on what he saw as a failure of the vice president over the past 3 years. And he's also, you know, talking about the fact that Walz had an incredible job of trying to defend the vice president while also talking or making the case why the Democratic ticket would be important for voters moving forward. But what was interesting about last night's debate, and it'll be interesting to see if Vance actually follows through with this during his rally today, Vance stayed away from, you know, any insults at Walz. This is the same vice presidential candidate over the past couple of weeks who have called Walz a liar, has said he was a coward, blamed him for the riots in Minneapolis. There was nothing but pleasantries during this debate between the two of them. In fact, he said they agreed on a lot of things. This was a huge evolution of Vance's thoughts, and it'd be interesting to see if during this rally he goes back on the attack against the Minnesota governor.
We also saw in a lot of CBS News polling before that debate that so many voters said, look, we don't want personal attacks. We want to stay with substance and issues. And it looks like the candidates may have heard that and delivered on that promise, at least. Before we let you go, any reaction from former President Donald Trump, now candidate Trump, on how his running mate performed last night?
Well, Reed, the former president was quite happy with Vance's performance. In fact, he's been tweeting out or sending out quite a few memes on his social media site, Truth Social, boasting about his running mate's performance. One notable thing happened from the debate on the issue of abortion, based on the response from Vance on whether or not this administration, his administration, if they are elected, would do something about a national abortion ban. Donald Trump posted to his Truth Social site that he would support vetoing a national abortion ban if it came across his desk. That is a notable pivot from what he said during his own debate, showing that they are, at least on this, aligned.
All right, Torian Small, thank you so much for that update. Let's now ride our video monitors to the Middle East, and a question that really was a big question at the start of that vice presidential debate, a breaking point in tensions after Iran launched as many as 200 ballistic missiles into Israel. The big question of whether Israel will respond really appears to have an answer at this hour. CBS News hearing from Israel a vow to deliver what they call a very painful response. And Israel is not alone in this. The White House is now echoing that very same message. You just heard President Joe Biden talking about sanctions there on the tarmac on his way to North Carolina. Severe consequences promised by the United States. And look at this, and listen to this. Our monitors have this new video and the sounds showing us the very moments U.S. Navy crews in that region launched missiles in defense of Israel during that Iranian attack. Darkness, and then watch this, the fire in the night. Every one of these projectiles launched to try to take down an Iranian missile. And right now, it does appear that U.S. muscle took down a lot of those Iranian missiles before they could hit key targets in Israel. So let's go live now to Tel Aviv, where that sky lit up with those missiles you just saw. CBS News digital international reporter Haley Ott with us now. Haley, we're glad you're okay. Israel promising a major response there. What do we know about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plans?
The short answer is not very much. Netanyahu vowed that Iran would pay for its barrage of missiles that it launched at Israel, but that's about all the detail that we got. Israeli officials have said that enemies of Israel throughout the Middle East should know that Israel can reach them, and if they don't understand that yet, they soon will. But those are the kinds of statements that we are hearing today, and we're not expecting to get any more details of any sort of Israeli response before it begins. And that is what is so concerning to people who are watching this conflict and worrying that we could be at a point where it spirals out of control.
So we've seen a lot of response there in the sky in some of that video as we watch the sky right now where you are reporting for any action. But we also understand that Israel has announced moving further troops to the border with Lebanon, the ground game, so to speak. So let's keep it focused on that ground combat in Lebanon. What can you tell us?
Yes, so today, as so many people have been thinking about what Israel's response to Iran might be, its operations in Lebanon and in Gaza have continued. The ground operation in Lebanon is continuing. There have been strikes on both sides of the border. And today, Israel announced its first casualties in that operation, 8 IDF troops who have died. And Israeli strikes in Gaza have continued today. Dozens of people have been killed in those strikes, which are ongoing as well.
So Haley, before we let you go, we're mindful that while this all plays out, Hamas continues to hold hostages, and every one of those hostages has a family that's terrified and worried. Your reporting with the families of those hostages goes back almost a year. How are these families reacting to this news?
Yes, I spent a few hours today with one of the families that I met soon after the October 7th attacks. They've spent the past year trying to get the 6 members of their family, some of them killed, some of them taken hostage by Hamas, back home. They've succeeded with all but one of their family members. And today is actually Rosh Hashanah, that's the Jewish New Year. So they were preparing for a big family meal, and they're going to leave a seat empty for one of their family members at that meal this evening, that person who's still being held in Gaza. They say, and the people that they're working with, other family members of people who have been taken hostage, say that they're going to continue pushing for some sort of deal to get their family members released.
All right, Haley, thank you so much for that. We're mindful of the October anniversary of the terrible attacks by Hamas in Israel and thinking about those families and so many people affected by all of this violence. Haley, be safe yourself. When we come back, we expect members of the State Department to stand before the mic to talk about this and a myriad of other issues. Will the United States be drawn into a larger conflict, or can this just be limited to sanctions, like President Joe Biden just said a moment ago on the tarmac before taking off to tour the devastation of Hurricane Helene? What will happen in Iran? What will happen in Israel? And most importantly, what role will the United States play at this very crucial and tense time? CBS News 24/7, streaming coast to coast and worldwide. All eyes on this podium when we come back. Our video feeds now take us to Memphis, Tennessee, where closing arguments will soon begin in the federal trial of 3 former officers charged in the death of Tyree Nichols. So those officers accused of beating Nichols to death after a traffic incident back in January 2023. They face up to life in prison if convicted. Let's jump the map now to the state of California, where a doctor is expected to formally plead guilty for his connection to the death of actor Matthew Perry. So last month, Dr. Mark Chavez did not enter a plea in larger charges, but did agree to plead guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. So it's a plea deal, and as part of that deal, Chavez admitted to taking prescription drugs from his former employer. He allegedly conspired with another doctor to supply Perry with ketamine. Jumping the map now to the state of Georgia. Once again, word of a shelter in place after a massive fire at a chemical plant in Rockdale County. That's just east of Atlanta. So if you're thinking that report goes against what we told you yesterday, you're right. So here's why. That shelter in place, it was lifted on Monday. People allowed to go back home as we reported. But fast forward to today, and officials now doing an about face. They're now saying air quality monitors show toxic plume spikes, especially at night. So once again, shelter in place, in place. Well, tens of thousands of union dock workers are on strike for a second day in a row. Now keep in mind, this is the first dock worker strike since 1977. Those workers out on the picket line demanding better pay and a ban on automation from their employer group. CBS News correspondent Nancy Chen reports how this deadlock could affect your prices that you pay for goods and services.
Reed, good afternoon. Negotiations continue to be at a standstill. The employer group representing the terminal operators and the ocean carriers, USMX, said in their most recent offer includes a nearly 50% wage increase and keeping their current policy on automation and semi-automation. Dock workers, however, they say this is a defining time for automation and their industry as a whole.
We're looking ahead into the future. Going to work now at the risk of losing our jobs 5 or 10 years down the road is very short-sighted. So that's why we're here.
That and pay are the main sticking points right now. Workers here on the East and Gulf Coast earn between $20 to $39 per hour, which is significantly less than what their peers on the West Coast make. Now, the effects of this strike are widespread. By one estimate, its economic impact could be up to $5 billion a day. And for each day that this strike goes on, it will take roughly 6 days to clear the backlog that follows because of it. These ports handle about 80% of the country's coffee, tea, spirit, and beverages, as well as about 60% of medical and surgical instruments coming into the United States. Also halted right now, about 76% of vehicle exports. That said, from a consumer standpoint, the effects are not really widely felt at this point, not quite noticeable just yet. Many companies have been preparing for the strike for months by front-loading their imports. However, if this strike does go on for a week or more, that's when you could start to see its effects, primarily with produce, which has a much shorter shelf life than many of the other items. Reed.
Thank you so much for that update. When we come back, big news out of the Big Apple, word of possible additional charges against New York Mayor Eric Adams. Welcome back. When we see it, you see it. So just moments ago, a briefing from the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. He talked about President Joe Biden on the phone, speaking with leaders from the G7 nations. Listen to what he had to say.
Thank you. This morning, in advance of the president's call with the G7 leaders, the secretary convened a call of the foreign ministers from France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. On that call, he discussed with them working together to coordinate a response to Iran's attack on Israel. Further discussed how to coordinate diplomatic efforts moving forward to ensure stability in the Middle East. Secretary then joined the president's call with the G7. I'm sure you saw the readout that the White House issued a short time ago, where they made clear that the G7 condemns Iran's attack on Israel and is working together on a response, including new sanctions. With that, Matt. Not Matt.
I'll be Matt today.
Really? Go ahead.
So Biden said he does not support an attack on Iran's nuclear sites. Is that a red line for the U.S., and are there any others? What's your message to Israel on how this response should look?
So the president made very clear what we do not support. I think beyond that, we will continue to discuss with Israel what the shape of their response will be. I'm not going to air all of those discussions privately, but we have made very clear that this was an unprecedented escalation by Iran. Israel has a right to respond to it, and we'll discuss that response with them.
Are the Israelis listening to you? Do you have any indications that Israel is even inclined to listen to the U.S. after having made operational decisions on its own that led to success?
Look, they're a sovereign country. They do make their own decisions. We talk with them at a number of different levels about what we believe is in their interest, what we believe is in the interest of the region. We'll continue to do that, but ultimately it's up for them, as it is for any sovereign country, to make their own decisions.
Are they receptive to what you've been telling them in these conversations, though? Do you have any indication that they're going to listen or coordinate with you on what the next steps are?
I think it's appropriate at this point that we keep those conversations private.
And then just on Gaza ceasefire prospects, has there been any progress on that since the attack on Hezbollah communications equipment? Are there any meetings taking place? Is there a path forward for that at this point, or has that been overtaken by Israel and Hezbollah?
It's not that it's been overtaken by the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. It's that Hamas has, again, refused to engage. I went through some of this yesterday, and I'm happy to go through it again. This really predates the events of the past week, 10 days, where we've seen Israel launching attacks on increased attacks on Hezbollah. It goes back several weeks where we were at this point where we were trying to get together a next proposal that we, along with the other mediators, Egypt and Qatar, would present to the two parties. And in preparing for that step, we're doing various soundings of what might be agreeable, trying to play the role of a mediator and come up with a response that would get to yes on both sides. And Hamas has refused to engage. So it's not from a lack of interest on our part, it's not from a lack of focus on our part, but when you're trying to put together a deal, you have to have the parties themselves engage. And over the last few weeks, Hamas has been unwilling for whatever reason to engage. So, go ahead. You seated your right, yeah.
Well, I was late, I'm sorry. I was on the call.
Just to bounce off Gaza, Israel is still, they don't have as many troops in Gaza at the moment, given their movement of a lot of troops up north. They are still doing operations in Gaza. Can you give us any kind of update on what their next steps are in Gaza in terms of like any kind of transition phase? Is there anything that they like in terms of what their plan is, if there are no communications with Hamas? I know that a lot of this is on the wraps, but any kind of how the US is pivoting?
I think they should speak for what their next plans are. Obviously, we have been clear about what we believe the post-conflict period should look like in Gaza, but when it comes to what Israel's plans are, it's something that they should speak to.
Okay, and on Lebanon,
all eyes on the State Department addressing what is going to happen between Israel and Iran and how the United States will be involved and what that will mean to our military, 40,000 military members stationed there in that region. When we come back, we say streaming coast to coast and worldwide, we are on both coasts in Los Angeles in a courtroom that is dealing with the death of actor Matthew Perry and reports of a doctor about to plead guilty in that case. Then on the other side of the country, potential additional charges against the mayor of New York when we come back. Tank top weather if you live in Los Angeles, all the way up the coast into San Francisco. California heat wave. Try to find ways to stay cool. That is what our neighbors in California are dealing with today. Jess?
Widespread throughout the state of California and all throughout the Southwest, those electrical bills are going to be high as we head into this afternoon, with daytime highs breaking records throughout that region. Let's start off down in Southern California, stretching up along that coastline into the Bay Area and past that too. Excessive heat warnings and heat advisories are in effect all throughout the Sacramento Valley as we head into the afternoon hours today, with record-breaking heats widespread throughout areas like Las Vegas, Denver, Salt Lake City this afternoon, and San Jose just yesterday broke records as well just in the Bay Area. We are dealing with triple-digit weather widespread throughout the Southwest as we head into the afternoon hours today and tomorrow, as this large heat dome sits directly over that region. We've been dealing with above-average weather all week, and of course this causes a lot of concerns when it comes to heat risk and illness. Taking a look behind me real fast, I want to dive into the forecast off into the west, because areas like the Bay, they're not seeing any relief anytime soon as we head into this week's forecast. An area of high pressure sits directly over the state of California, and it lingers offshore as we head into the coming days, giving us record-breaking heat anywhere, like I said, from Denver stretching right back into California. So the Climate Prediction Center is showing above normal conditions throughout this region throughout the next 6 to 10 days. Heading into this weekend's forecast, we'll see a little bit of a dip in temperature temperatures widespread throughout California for Thursday and Friday. And we're back to above average conditions lasting into early next week. Now, on the opposite end of the states, they're dealing with something different. Of course, the hurricane swept throughout the Appalachian and, of course, throughout the south too, the southeast, and that impacted them when it came to cooler temperatures and heavy rain. That's what they're still dealing with as we head into the rest of this week's forecast. I'll have more on that coming up. For now, over to you, Reed.
All right, so let's stay in California. A San Diego doctor is in court today. Why? He's expected to plead guilty in connection to the death of Friends star Matthew Perry. 54-year-old Mark Chavez faces one count of conspiracy to distribute ketamine. That's the drug listed as the cause of Matthew Perry's death. That charge could land him in prison for a decade. Let's go live right now to Los Angeles, where CBS News correspondent Adam Yamaguchi joins us. He's following the case again in court today. So, Adam, explain to our viewers what the connectivity is between Chavez and Matthew Perry.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Matthew Perry had died in October of 2023 due to the acute effects of ketamine, and then he later drowned in his hot tub. Let me rewind a little bit. So Matthew Perry had a documented history of depression and drug addiction. He was in a clinic getting ketamine treatment, and that turned into an addiction itself. Then he turned to the illegal black market to continue to sort of fuel that addiction, and found a doctor who was willing to supply him. Now, Mark Chavez was able, he had worked at a ketamine clinic previously, used a falsified prescription under somebody else's name to obtain the ketamine, sold it to another doctor who eventually sold that drug to Matthew Perry's handlers.
So this is a plea deal, we understand, which usually means the person in trouble gave up something that will help in the investigation. Do we believe that more people could be in trouble based on things that Chavez agreed to give up in this plea deal?
Well, at this point, we don't know of any others that have not already been charged. But in this case, 4 others have already been charged as well. 2 have pled guilty. They've reached plea agreements, and the other 2, that's Dr. Plasencia, who I'd mentioned earlier, right, as well as Walz-Vance Sangha, who is known to authorities as the ketamine queen for having supplied the fatal dose to Matthew Perry. Those 2 have pled not guilty and are awaiting a trial next March.
Adam Yamaguchi, thank you so much for that report outside the courtroom in Los Angeles. So our video feeds now have us jumping the map to the other side of the country, New York City, where Mayor Eric Adams is trying to weather the storm after last week's federal indictment. And that means, you see there, he's walking up the steps to the courtroom yet again today. Here, CBS News New York breaking the news to their viewers and the nation just a short while ago.
We begin with breaking news in the Mayor Adams indictment. Prosecutors revealed at a status hearing this morning that it's possible the mayor could be facing additional charges and that more people could be indicted. Adams is already facing several charges, including wire fraud and bribery. He's asked that those charges be dismissed and that prosecutors be sanctioned for leaking details about the case. Jessica Moore is live outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan with the latest. Jessica.
Well, Cindy, as you just said, additional charges are possible. Additional co-conspirators could be indicted. This case could explode even more widely. Meanwhile, Mayor Adams today said he's still in charge of the city, has no plans of stepping down, and he can effectively run New York City. Mayor Adams walks into court for his first appearance since being formally charged with 5 federal crimes. The indictment charges Adams with bribery, wire fraud, conspiracy, and soliciting campaign donations from foreign nationals. The alleged crime stretched back to 2014 when Adams was Brooklyn Borough president and includes details of lavish international trips with airline and hotel upgrades in exchange for political favors for the Turkish government. Yesterday, Adams fielded questions focused on the myriad investigations targeting his administration. The mayor insisted he is in charge and has no plans of stepping down or naming an acting mayor. Adams filled 2 vacancies in his administration Tuesday, including the position of chief counsel, and later joined a group of black clergy leaders for a prayer circle outside City Hall.
I want us to remain focused. We've done so much in this administration to help people like the ones who are are behind us.
Adams' legal team has been furiously ramping up its defense this week. On Tuesday, his attorneys filed motions calling for sanctions on federal prosecutors, accusing them of leaking details of the investigation to the media. And on Monday, Adams' attorney, Alex Spiro, requested the judge toss out the bribery charge entirely, arguing the details in the indictment do not meet the threshold of a quid pro quo.
They wanted the word fraud.
We were expecting a trial date could be set today at this pretrial hearing. That did not happen. Both parties are requesting that the trial start in the spring, either March or May. That could happen at the next appearance on the 18th.
All right, so many things happening there in New York relative to leadership, and the courts will continue watching that. When we come back, we'll go live to Washington, D.C. one day after the vice presidential debate. We're going to have a report live from the White House lawn. We'll see you there. Welcome back. One day after the CBS News vice presidential debate, Republican Senator J.D. Vance making his case to Michigan voters. You see the live podium there in Auburn Hills, Michigan. He will very soon take to that podium. Michigan, a very key state in the race to the White House. Meanwhile, Governor Tim Walz is also back on the campaign trail today. He is traveling to the state of Pennsylvania. Once again, a very coveted voter base there. So, who do voters feel won the night? A new CBS News poll finds 42% of debate watchers say Vance won. 41% say Walz was the winner. By the way, 17% asked that question about who won the VP debate. They say it was a tie. So when it comes to talking about big campaign issues, let's look at this. Walz ranked higher on abortion and health care, while J.D. Vance got the edge on talking about the economy and immigration. You know who knows more? CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, bringing you in live now from your standpoint where you are standing. What were the biggest takeaways from last night's debate?
Hey, Reed, good to see you. I'll take all the compliments I can get. You know, it's always interesting to look at these things the morning after, hear from not just pundits, but actual real voters and see what they think. I think a lot of Democrats last night were a little concerned that Walz was too timid, too hesitant, that he didn't land enough knockout punches on Vance until right at the end. They still feel that way this morning, but they've been pleasantly surprised to see some of these polls showing that voters actually believe that Walz did at least as well, and in some cases better than Vance did. That's a pleasant takeaway for them, particularly when you look at the independent voters who are going to decide this election, this small sliver of undecided voters. And I think the fact that that sliver is so small gives you a sense of why the gloves maybe didn't come off to the extent that one would have expected them to from both sides. Both campaigns know that this is the universe of voters who are going to decide this election. These are moderate voters. They are in the middle. Perhaps slugging it out with the other side is not what these voters are looking for. They're looking for evidence that you are somewhere in the middle, that you are willing to compromise with the other side. And that's why you heard these two candidates say over and over again on so many different issues last night, to the surprise of many, that they agree with each other on some fronts.
Imagine that. You know, CBS News polling seemed to reflect that that's what voters wanted. They wanted to hear more of a substantive debate rather than attacks. So, you know, you and I, and a lot of people always watch these debates for moments that stick. What were the strong moments for each candidate that will stick enough to get reshared on social media and rebroadcast today?
The stickiest moment probably came at the very end of the debate, and it was during a discussion of democracy where they were talking about January 6th, and you know the moment where Tim Walz turned to J.D. Vance and said, do you believe that Donald Trump lost the election? And Vance hesitated and notably was never able to say that Donald Trump lost. I predicted last night that that moment would end up in a Harris ad by the end of the week. I was wrong because it ended up in a Harris ad by the end of the night. They are already airing ads highlighting that exchange, arguing that Trump and Vance can't be trusted. They believe that that is a moment that will break through for voters. But it wasn't the only moment. They had a very memorable exchange on abortion. Walz notably had a lot of trouble answering a question about some misleading statements he had made in the past about being in China during the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. He really struggled there. So I think those are some of the moments that are going to live on in ads and online.
All right, from moments that stick to sticking the landing, as always, Nancy Cordes, thank you so much. It's nice to talk to you this afternoon on the stream. So we continue to follow growing tensions out of the Middle East. That was one of the questions that was brought up in the debates last night. Israel says 8 of its soldiers are dead this morning in clashes with Hezbollah on the ground in Lebanon. Those assaults are among the deadliest against Israeli forces in months. And they come a day after, and we're seeing the video here, after Iran launched these ballistic missiles into the sky to attack Israel. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay is outside Tel Aviv and shows us what it looks like on the ground.
Some of those missiles did get through, like the one that smashed this car in a residential area outside of Tel Aviv. Among the roughly 180 ballistic missiles Israel says Iran fired at Israel overnight, lighting up the night sky with incandescent debris, as many of those missiles were intercepted by Israel's defenses. We saw missiles flying over places like the Western Wall in Jerusalem, and of course here in Tel Aviv, Israel's biggest city. Iran was jubilant. There were images of people there celebrating this attack from Iran on Israel, and there were some people who were injured here. In fact, one person at least we know was killed in these attacks. All of this comes amid a widening war in Israel at its northern border with Lebanon as it goes after Hezbollah, which has been wreaking havoc across northern Israeli towns for the past 11 months, displacing roughly 70,000 people. The Israeli military announced earlier this week it was launching a limited offensive across the border with Lebanon and showed pictures of them destroying tunnels and destroying weapons they say they found inside of these tunnels. It's a level of intensity and fighting we haven't seen in this part of Lebanon since the last time Israel fought a full-blown ground invasion against Hezbollah in 2006. Chris Livesay, CBS News, outside Tel Aviv.
That report from the ground there to reports of what's going on in Washington, D.C. Word that President Joe Biden was on a call with leaders of those G7 nations to sort of coordinate what the response will be, if anything. The U.S. backing up Israel once again, saying there will be a response. Now this. Our Eye on America segment is our daily commitment. We're delivering on it every day in and day out, to tell your stories in your communities where you live. So let's go to Georgia on the map now to talk about a legal battle brewing ahead of November's election over whether ballots should be counted one by one, painstakingly by hand. That hand count could delay Georgia's election results for a long time. Well, guess what? Despite some fierce opposition by elections workers saying hand counts make their jobs nearly impossible, Georgia State Election Board leaders passed a rule requiring ballots be counted by hand. Democrats who know this could delay the election results filed a lawsuit on Monday, hoping to block what the election board passed. So let's really drill down on this. In the last 4 years, 11 states have attempted hand counting in local elections or introduced legislation that require that very thing. But as CBS News chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett reports, there's really no evidence that hand counting is more reliable.
For the last year, Mark Cook has been preaching a kind of low-tech election-doubting gospel in communities across the country.
But we're told, trust the machine, and that is a way to manipulate an election.
Traveling by RV, Cook and his Hand Count Roadshow are part of an election conspiracy movement that's been growing since 2020. One that claims that voting machines can be hacked and manipulated, meaning the only voting system to be trusted is an old-fashioned hand count.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm back.
On this night last year, Cook is in deep red Gillespie County, Texas.
0.1% of Texas still hand counts.
He convinced Republicans here, who run their own primaries, to join the small minority that hand count. Hundreds of volunteers stayed at places like this wine bar until 4:30 in the morning to count roughly 8,000 votes, with numerous errors.
We only have 13 precincts, 12 of which turned in final tally sheets that were inaccurate.
We sort of began.
Jim Riley oversees elections in Gillespie County. Is there an actual problem here that needs to be solved by hand counting?
No. The hand counting, in my opinion, did nothing to improve elections in the county.
Riley, a Republican, says Gillespie's systems were already top-notch. Paper ballots tallied by a state-approved scanner and then verified for accuracy. As much as you've opened up transparency, it still, for some, hasn't been enough.
No, and for some it won't ever be enough.
Something didn't smell right.
Mo Saidi was the Republican chair of Gillespie County when the hand count roadshow came to town.
And nobody provided a single iota of evidence. And it was just this perception that if it's plugged into the wall, they're subject to hacking.
Frustrated by his party's decision, Saidi resigned.
So we're chasing this elusive problem that never existed.
Numerous studies have shown hand counts to be less accurate, more costly, more time-consuming. But that hasn't stopped Cook from preaching. In Michigan, we tracked down his RV to ask him some basic questions. He drove away. And again, in Pennsylvania. Major Garrett, CBS News. Will you have any time to talk to me?
Oh, I'm going to be doing a lot of talking.
No, I know. Beforehand.
No.
He wouldn't speak to us, but is a regular on right-wing podcasts.
The day after the election through January 20th, if you thought 2020 was nasty, you ain't seen nothing yet.
Even in the wake of Gillespie County's hand count ordeal, the hardened hand count faction is flooding county meetings demanding change before November. In retrospect, the hand count experience here has been a net what?
I think it's a net loss. If you don't like hand counting, you're evil.
Evil over what Gillespie County officials now say was a solution in search of a problem, and a cautionary tale for hand count advocates everywhere. For Eye on America, Major Garrett in Gillespie County, Texas.
All right, Major, thanks for that. Our live monitors just a moment ago caught President Joe Biden touching down in Greenville, South Carolina, in the wake of so much damage done by Hurricane Helene. That was a quick flight. The president coordinating with first responders there and state officials over recovery efforts. So the president, he's going to get off and he's going to talk on the ground, but then he's going to go back into the sky. And here's why. To do a ground tour during these early hours, that would mean a lot of personnel that travels with a president. So services would be interrupted to people who are still helped and searching for, or looking for help, and people who are still being searched for in many of those areas. We also just got this video of Vice President Kamala Harris taking off just moments ago. She's traveling to Georgia for a briefing about state recovery efforts there as well. We'll be eyeing that visit. Jess?
Let's start off down in the Carolinas, where we're finally starting to see some calmer activity. It has been so devastating seeing the video and all the photos coming out of that area that got hit heavy from a Category 4 at the time, pushing through Florida, moving its way up into communities that don't have easy access out. Now, as we take a look at the forecast down in Florida, they're starting to deal with that sea breeze system back and forth from the Atlantic over into the Gulf, and they're dealing with a lot of active weather this morning heading into this afternoon. So we're going to continue to keep a close eye on the south. I want to start off behind me, though, where we are starting to see calmer conditions up close to North and South Carolina. We're still dealing with that active, heavy weather in the forecast for us into the evening hours tonight, early morning hours tomorrow, closer to areas like Miami, stretching over into the Tampa Bay and back and forth as those sea breezes really start to converge. And of course, we're continuing to watch thunderstorm activity in that region too into our Thursday forecast. So scattered thunderstorms are possible for us as we head over into Florida, close to around 2-3 inches expected there. But the rest of the South right now finally starting to see some relief in sight, Reed.
And they need it because so many emergency responders are out there on the ground. Helene, second only in devastation to Hurricane Katrina. We leave you here with a look at President Joe Biden there on the tarmac landing in the Carolinas. He is talking to first responders there, coordinating a plan by the Biden administration to make sure that people there in the states affected by Helene get the help that they need.